everybody. Good evening. Hi there. We're going to get the meeting started in about 1 minute, so if you could just find your seats. If anybody has a mobile device on them, if you could please just turn it to silent, and if you do need to make a call, if you could just step out into the hallway. So we're going to have our special council meeting from 6 until 7 or shortly thereafter, so if that's what you're here for, we're going to have a short recess after that and then move into our budget meeting, so you're welcome to exit if you don't want to stay for the second meeting, or you're welcome to stay. Okay, thank you.
I'll call this meeting to order, the special meeting of council. First, I'd like to begin by acknowledging that the land that we gather on is the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe Mississauga, adjacent to the Mississaugas of Scugog Island First Nation, and in the territory covered by the Williams Treaty. This place is and will continue to be home to Indigenous peoples. Let us move forward together with kindness and respect. Are there any disclosures of pecuniary interest? Being none. Members of council, we have two items on our agenda this evening. The first is the Save the Ajax Casino resolution, and the second is our formal response to the regions of York and Durham with respect to the Phosphorus Reduction Action Plan submission to the Ministry of the Environment and Climate Change of January 10th, 2018. So the first matter is the resolution. I will read it. It's moved by Councillor Collier and seconded by Councillor Jordan. Whereas the Casino Ajax is vulnerable to relocation to an undeveloped site in Pickering, and whereas Casino Ajax is considered a premier site in North America, generating $195 million in revenue, employing 338 people, with significant potential for growth and expansion on a proven site, and whereas non-tax revenue, approximately $7 million per year, from the casino allows the town to invest in vital infrastructure, such as recreation facilities, roads, parks, and amenities, without burdening our taxpayers with increased property taxes. And whereas the proposed Pickering site would not provide racing facilities for quarter horses to the detriment of Durham Region's horse racing industry, which provides 1,700 jobs and boosts Durham's economy by $56 million a year. And whereas the proposed Pickering site is located near a heritage district, lacks infrastructure to support a large-scale project, and is already plagued by traffic congestion. In addition, the site requires an interchange at Church Street and the 401, which the Ministry of Transportation has not planned for and will cost the taxpayers. And whereas Casino Ajax is serviced by the 401 and 412, easily accessible to residents and visitors from across the region and beyond, and whereas Casino Ajax has the full support of Ajax Council and the broader community, therefore be it resolved that Ajax Council strongly urges the Minister of Finance, Charles Sousa, to submit both proposed sites to a third-party cost-benefit analysis in a public and transparent process, and that Ajax Council call upon Joe Dixon MPP and nominated provincial candidates in Ajax to take a public position that the casino development will remain in Ajax, and that Council direct staff to work with OLG and Great Canadian Gaming to understand the decision-making process, and that the town implement an integrated communication strategy to engage the public in this matter, and that this resolution be distributed to Premier Kathleen Wynne, Finance Minister Charles Sousa, MPP Joe Dixon, PC candidate Rod Phillips, Quarter Horse Racing Owners of Ontario, Inc. Questions or comments on the resolution? Councillor Collier.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'd just like to speak quickly on the motion, and I will try and be brief because I know we're pressed for time. I see this as the most important issue that's going to be here in Ajax in the next provincial election. The slots, we all know, we ran a referendum back in 2003. It opened in 2005. It's operated seamlessly for the last 12 years. It hasn't caused crime. It hasn't caused issues. We've made good use of the money. I don't know about my colleagues in the north, but when I'm knocking on doors, people are asking, when is this going to be expanded? They want to see more of a tourism node. They want to see gaming tables and somewhere like a Casino Rama where they can go and see a live show and that type of thing. The proximity, as you said in the motion, to the 412 and the 407 and 401, again, makes this a sort of a no-brainer. However, politically, this is going to, I don't know how this is going to go, but I don't like being in a position where a company has been brought in through due process and is putting together a business plan that none of us get to see. And, you know, ultimately, the Minister of Finance is the one who's going to sign off on this. However, there may very well be a new Minister of Finance in June. We still have the outstanding OMB appeal decision on our Ajax land from the Durham Live. There's so many moving parts to this, but the main thing is the business case, and it's not transparent the way it's being done right now. We need to see those numbers. We need to see an apples-to-apples comparison of exactly the two sites and what they both bring to the table, because I feel strongly that the Ajax Downs, now Casino Ajax site, will stand head and shoulders above the other given that due process. So I think we're doing the right thing bringing this forward today and making this a loud, what's the best way to put it, you know, campaign in this coming election. Make sure everybody do what we did with the sewage treatment plant in the last election. You know, create a pledge, get the candidates involved, get everybody involved and educated on what's going on. Because right now, if you talk to a lot of people, they don't understand. We hold regular public open houses, all of us do, and not a meeting goes by where people, actually our last meeting last Tuesday, a large amount of the conversation was on the Ajax Downs, Casino Ajax. And what's happening, because people just don't know and they're interested. And it does have very big tax, well, not tax consequences, but our capital consequences going down the road here in Ajax. So I think we're doing the right thing. I think we need to make this very public and a very big deal about it. And I'm glad to support it and ask for a recorded vote, please, Chair. Thank you.
Councillor Jordan.
Yes, thank you. I'm pleased that we're putting this motion out and letting the public know as well, because I think it's imperative that they get involved. First of all, the revenues have assisted us greatly in keeping the tax rate lower and making sure that we can reduce our debt and so on. It's been significant. I think even in the budget we're looking at later, there's been an analysis of that, and it's about $75 less on the tax bill because of the revenue. And it's allowed us to do capital infrastructure that we might not otherwise have been able to do. But I think there's other issues, and specifically I think of the horse racing industry. I took part in a tour of that and was astonished at the economic boost that gives to Durham region. I think it's about $56 million a year. It's mentioned in our motion, as well as 1,700 jobs. And that's a boost to the entire Durham region. It's a boost to those who own the farms and raise the horses and so on up in the northern reaches of Durham, as well as to the feed industry, veterinarians, etc. And there's a number of people that rely on the horse industry for their livelihood. And it will be very difficult for that horse racing industry to succeed without being part and parcel of a casino activity. It works very well together, and we've seen that they support each other and that they work well together, as we've seen up at Peakov's. They've flourished. The other issue that's significant to Ajax is that the traffic congestion is already irritating residents that live in Pickering Village, specifically on Church Street. And where the proposal is being looked at in Pickering will affect that traffic in a very negative way. It's going to cause devastating effects on an area that's our heritage district, and which we've done a lot of work on to maintain it as a heritage district. And whereas the Ajax Casino is easily accessed by public transit, the 401 and 412, and visitors can come very readily to there, but not have such a significant impact on a neighborhood, and specifically a neighborhood that is a pride to the town as it is a heritage district. Also in the proposal, it's proposed that there be a new interchange. First of all, we know that the costs for that are astronomical, that it hasn't been planned for by the province. In fact, it's not all that many years ago that they shut down the Church Street interchange. And the number one reason was for safety issues, in that the interchange at Church would be too close to Salem and Westney, and it could cause significant safety issues to drivers using that. And I think to even consider putting another interchange in to support a casino in a different location is foolhardy. It's going to cost all taxpayers in the province more money, and also it jeopardizes the safety of people who are traveling on the 401 through that area. And I think we already have enough issues as far as traffic accidents and so on without adding to that, that hazard. So I will leave it at that, and certainly hope that our MPP Joe Dixon and all our other candidates in the provincial government listen and look at this issue very carefully, and that I believe a third-party analysis would look at all those issues and come to a conclusion that would be favorable to Ajax.
Councillor Crawford?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As I understand it, Durham Live is boasting of many new jobs. I don't know exactly the number they were talking about. Do you know what number they were talking about for new jobs to Durham?
I don't.
I don't. From what I understand, working in a casino has a very special skill set, and I don't believe that the number of jobs, new jobs that they're stating are going to happen are really new jobs, but that if in fact Durham Live was to happen, it would be a transfer from Casino Ajax into Durham Live, and so therefore the jobs aren't technically new jobs. I also think that if Ajax Casino was to go through with their expansion, the same amount of jobs would happen in Ajax Casino. So it's not, you know, if they were given the opportunity. I've also understood that that the Durham Live development wasn't contingent on the casino. So question is, why haven't they started to build if it's not contingent on getting the casino? So it's just my comments.
Councillor Ashby?
Oh, thank you, Your Worship. Just want to say my whole history with the casino dates back to when I was here as staff for the town of Ajax. And at that time, basically the discussion centered around community safety. It centered around vehicle infiltration into the existing residential community to the north. And the discussion was about just the whole destabilization of that particular neighborhood. I've been on council now for 10 years, and the doors that I've knocked to, I would agree with Councillor Collier, that no one has said to me there any problems or having any problems or any issues with the casino. We all get comments about garbage pickup, snow removal. Sorry, Dave. And but I've never gotten a direct comment about the casino, and that speaks to how that facility is run, and just them being good corporate citizens. So I will, Mr. Chair, I will support this motion, and what I'm just mainly keenly interested in is a seamless, a transparent process in terms of the decision making that would be done. Thank you.
Councillor Dice?
Thank you. I do support this motion. There's a lot of issues that will have an impact on residents here in Ajax. particularly when you talk to residents, they speak to their lack of understanding as to why you take a facility that's working so well and already built and move it to land where they're going to have to rebuild it and start all over again. The impact on the village is huge. It is a heritage district. It has a lot of our heritage infrastructure there on Church Street South, and is not a great location. The location that we have our slots in now is perfect for getting onto the new link onto the 407 or getting onto the 401. And we all know that there are issues with, severe issues with traffic problems in the area that they propose to do it if it goes to the Durham Live lands. So I think it was interesting that when they rezoned the lands, Pickering made a comment that they were perfectly suited for this entertainment node as there was no impact on any residential. I don't know how you can make a decision on when you have two municipalities that are sharing that dividing line, how you can make a decision without even including the other municipality in some of the discussions, because the impacts will be huge. Particularly with traffic, and our taxpayers in Ajax will be held accountable and will have to pay for all the repairs that will need to be done at Westney interchanges along different routes that they will take to get there because they can't do it through Pickering. So there's a lot of issues that need to be addressed, and I think people have to take a stand and start speaking to the province, sending messages to the Premier and to the province about what we can do and what we want and don't want with respect to this type of development right next to our residential development. Thank you.
Councilor Brown?
Thank you. I agree with everybody, but the only thing I would like to add is I'm tired of being asked by residents what's going on, and my saying I have no idea. They profess open and transparent. Well, nothing like that has occurred. All I can say to residents, I really don't know. They say this they will announce this date, then they change the date. We've been all over the place with this, and it has a huge impact on our residents, and they've not had a public meeting about it. Anything to do with what their concerns are with this location. And when we as the politicians say anything to our neighbors, they say, oh, it will not affect the residents of Ajax. Well, it will big time. And so hopefully, at the very least, that they're going to, through the election, something's going to be announced about what procedure they're going to go forward with. Because until the residents of Ajax and our council have something, a business plan, a transport plan to look at, well, we just can't say anything. So I don't know where this is going, how effective this resolution is going to be. We have to try everything. Thank you.
Thank you.
Recorded vote, please. Oh, you did? Okay. I want to make sure we see it's unanimous.
Can I speak before we have the recorded vote? You know, this resolution basically goes through a lot of the points that have been reiterated by members of council that are all valid points, but the motion asks for the proposed sites to undergo a third-party cost-benefit analysis in a public and transparent process. The thing that has just astounded me in this whole thing is just how untransparent, how opaque, how in a dark room this whole thing is taking place. We know that the new operator took over the site, or was designated to take over the site in August, and took over the site formally in the not-too-distant past. We at the town have reached out to the new operator on several occasions to introduce ourselves, to have a meeting, to discuss the future, etc. No such meeting has been taken place. There's been no interest in having such a meeting. We've tried to get information from OLG. No information is forthcoming. We've reached out to the province. No information is forthcoming. Has the new operator met with the city of Pickering? Has the new operator met with Durham Live? Who's going to pay for this interchange? Who's going to pay for the improvements for a flyover at Squares Beach Road and Ocean Road? Who is going to be responsible for the traffic gridlock that happens year in and year out in this community, across Bailey Street, right across the whole area? Why did MPP Dixon co-author a letter with Tracy McCharles, a Minister of the Crown for the Province of Ontario, extolling the virtues of the Durham Live site, knowing full well that the Durham Live site going forward would only result in the Ajax Down site closing down? There are a whole bunch of things happening behind the scene. Is this a fair process? Has a political deal been made? We need to know all of these answers, and I've just skimmed the surface of the questions that need to be asked. For example, if there is a business case to be compared, are all these other factors that have been mentioned by council, all these costs, the infrastructure that's already in place in Ajax and isn't in place in Pickering, is this all going to be factored in? Is a built-out site in Pickering being compared to a built-out site in Ajax? Or is the Ajax site as its status quo, as it is today, being compared to a built-out site in Pickering? Do we trust the proponent to do a business case that's unbiased? Do we expect the government just to take their business case and say, yes, right, we agree with everything you say? Or do we expect an open, transparent, impartial process to take place? We're getting absolutely no answers to very legitimate questions. We're entitled to those answers. The people of this town are entitled to these answers. And the people of this province are entitled to these answers. I know the government's motivated by maximizing the amount of revenue that goes to the province from this site and all the casino sites throughout the province. And that's their priority. But are they going to allow a process that doesn't weigh these two sites equally and compare apples to apples and not apples to oranges? And are they going to ignore the horrendous transportation issues that come with this new site that don't come with the Ajax Down site or the Casino Ajax site? And how are those going to be factored in? Are they just going to download those expenses onto the taxpayers of Ajax and Durham Region and the province of Ontario? So these are the questions that we need answers to. And this is what this resolution asks: for a clear, transparent, open process that everyone can understand. This government says it believes in transparent government. The opposition says they believe in transparent government. Well, talk is cheap. Show us. Show us a transparent process that we can all buy into, that the town of Ajax can fully participate in, that the owners of the Casino Ajax site can fully participate in, that everyone can fully participate in, and get a strong, clear answer on all these questions. That's what this resolution's all about. I suspect that some people would love to kick this issue down the road to after June 7th. But that's not appropriate. These answers should be known to everyone before they go out the door and cast a ballot on June 7th. And they should know where their candidates stand on this issue, and not just in terms of platitudes, but in terms of real commitments. Because, as every member of council has said in so many different ways, This is a very, very, very important issue to this town, and we as a council will not let this be done in the dark and behind closed doors, because that's just totally inappropriate. So that's all I have to say. Madam Clerk, recorded vote.
On the motion, in favor or opposed, Regional Councillor Collier.
In favor.
Councillor Crawford.
In favor.
Councillor Dyes.
In favor?
Regional Councillor Jordan.
In favor.
Councillor Ashby.
In favor.
Councillor Brown.
In favor?
Mayor Parrish.
In favor. That's carried unanimously. Somewhat surprisingly. Our second item on the special council agenda is the response to the Region of York and Durham Phosphorus Reduction Action Plan submission to the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change dated January 10th, 2018. And to present on this, we have first Dr. Martin Auer of Michigan Technological University and Jennifer Danahy, a lawyer with Gowlings. Welcome.
Thank you, Mayor Parrish and members of council. It is a distinct pleasure to be back in Ajax as I celebrate my 40th year working on this particular problem in the Great Lakes. And yes, I am old. We have been, Michigan Tech has been working in the Ajax area now for over 3 years. And we have been conducting studies on the algae, on phosphorus, and on conditions in the lakeshore. We have more recently been welcomed to participate with regional representatives and treatment plant staff in developing the phosphorus reduction action plan required of the plant by the Ministry of the Environment. And I'm here to report on our results and analysis of that work tonight. As of the Great Lakes ecosystem. However, when stimulated by excessive discharges of phosphorus, it grows vigorously, creating nuisance conditions, as the picture on the right shows, taken at a depth of 2.5 meters off the beaches of the town of Ajax. It's of interest to examine why we have this problem to deal with. In the 1970s, we examined phosphorus management on a whole lake basis, as if we were gathering up all at that time was part of Fisheries and Oceans Canada, by Todd Howell of MOECC and by Michigan Tech, show that measurements of Cladophora at Ajax are routinely well in excess of those considered to be nuisance conditions. When we begin to look at management, we want to look at this relationship between the amount of phosphorus in the lake water and how much Cladophora is present. And we want to distinguish between a linear region at low phosphorus concentrations, where the more phosphorus, that they're insensitive to changes at all. They're just, their bellies are full. Those colors and the shape of that curve will come back as we continue this analysis. Michigan Tech did a intensive study in 2016 at a site off the treatment plant, demonstrating that two very important points here. First of all, at this location around the outfall water, offshore water that inhabits the Ajax nearshore. But it also shows the presence of very high levels of phosphorus, greater than 3 micrograms P per liter, of a very saturating level. And those are mixing here. Now that plume is present every day of the year, all day, every day. But it moves around, carrying that nutrient across Ajax, back to Pickering, up to Whitby, and back again. Examination of the P stored inside the algae. This algae has the capability of performing what's called luxury uptake, and that is that it can store phosphorus for future growth at times when it's available. We might say that by analogy, this is similar to athletes that measure their percent body fat. And you can see from this figure that the phosphorus content of the algae is highest around localized sources such as the Duffin Creek treatment plant. So we believe that this is clear evidence. We know that we have nuisance problems. We know they occur from elevated phosphorus levels, and we identify the treatment plants, particularly for Ajax, the Duffin Creek plant, as the source of that phosphorus. To complement this analysis, I performed a budget on the phosphorus entering the Ajax area from the Rouge River and Duffin's Creek, Carruthers Creek, and the treatment plant. And the findings of that calculation were that for the May to August period of 2016, for the time period when Cladophora grows, 98% of the phosphorus entering that area came from the Duffin Creek Water Pollution Control Plant. Now, the plume from that plant is met on the lakeside by some of the lowest P water. It was considered oligotrophic. The offshore waters are very, very low in phosphorus, and we see that in our regular monitoring programs. So we have concluded from that that there is a problem, there is a nuisance condition, there are elevated levels of phosphorus, and we believe that they originate from the treatment plant discharge, which is surrounded by very low P water from the offshore waters. I'd like to take a look now at some of the management activities. One of the major questions is what would happen if the plant were allowed to increase from its current baseline flow condition to its full permitted discharge of 630 million liters per day. We've been using the analogy in discussing this of toothpaste in a toothpaste tube. And the harder you squeeze it, the farther it squirts. And adding flow is like squeezing that toothpaste tube. And because the effluent plume is constrained by physical conditions to the near shore, as you increase that flow, you're going to send the plume further and further up and down the shore. Now we would like to take a look at model simulations of areas that are impacted by saturating conditions of phosphorus under various treatment scenarios. Under the baseline scenario, this is an image of one single day in the simulation, but the area calculation is the average for the entire summer growing season. And at present, 12.2 square kilometers of lakefront are covered with saturating levels of phosphorus over the summer. That's under the baseline condition. We know that the effect of flow is one described by that toothpaste tube, because in 1970, our hindcast simulation shows the plume from the two or three small plants that serve Pickering and Ajax constrained to quite a small area. But with the regional plant put in place later, we now see the toothpaste has been squeezed much further down the coast and the potential plume is much greater. If we were to increase the amount of flow from the plant, you would see that the red area around Ajax doesn't really change that significantly because the significant impact is out at the edges. But if you look at the insets, you see that those high phosphorus conditions under this particular transport scenario are carried further up into Whitby and Oshawa and even Clarington. And when the wind takes it the other way, it would go down towards Pickering and beyond in a similar fashion. We then took a look at the effects of treatment, comparing the baseline scenario, the contemporary scenario, with what is termed optimized secondary treatment. That is the current process, but run very carefully to very tight standards, and that's the region's preferred option, versus tertiary treatment, the town's preferred option. The optimized treatment would result in a 23% reduction in the soluble reactive phosphorus load. The tertiary treatment option would yield a much larger reduction. So if we first compare the response to optimization, we see that there is very little change. It is a reduction from 12.2 kilometers squared to 10.3 kilometers squared, and there is essentially no relief provided through an optimization approach. If we were to install tertiary treatment, the plume is gone. What we have done here is we removed 98.8% of that 98% that comes in from the treatment plant. And if this course of action were taken, if the town's preferred option were adopted, it would no longer be possible to point to the treatment plant as a source of phosphorus, leading to problems in the Ajax area. And it's unquestionable that the response would be in kind on behalf of the algae. This can be summarized returning to the phosphorus management curve. The reason that optimization does not get us where we want to go is that we're still out in saturated country. But when we go to tertiary treatment, we move down into that very sensitive region where phosphorus growth is strongly phosphorus limited. Our findings are consistent with those of Todd Howell, who worked at Fisheries and Oceans Canada, and Todd Howell with ACC, that local source of phosphorus should be the primary focus of management while trying to keep lake-wide concentrations low. So our scientific findings, our engineering analysis, both point operation of the Duffin Creek Water Pollution Control Plant. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Dr. Howell. Members of council, I'm going to ask Ms. Danahy to make her presentation, then I'm going to open questions to both delegates. So, Ms. Danahy. Do you need some assistance with that? No, you're good?
I think he's got it. So, okay, thank you to Your Worship and members of council and members of residents of Ajax, thank you very much for your time tonight. I'm going to pick up from where Dr. Auer left off and talk about why phosphorus load reduction is required in the Ajax nearshore. I am going to talk a little bit about the regulatory history related to phosphorus, so we understand how we've come to where we are today in terms of the problem that we have. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the minister's order that led to the Phosphorus Reduction Action Plan, or PRAP, study that the regions have just released, Ajax's response to that study, and the request that we would like to make to the Ministry of the Environment in terms of a solution to be implemented for this problem. So as Dr. Auer has pointed out, algae is present across the lake but isn't a problem everywhere. The problem here in Ajax is overproduction because the algae is over-fertilized by a constant source of bioavailable phosphorus. From a regulatory perspective, we care about this because it causes adverse effects that are prohibited by our environmental laws in Ontario. Environmental effects that range from destruction of fish habitat, which is prohibited under the Fisheries Act and under our Ontario Water Resources Act, very severe odor impacts that keep residents from opening their windows or using their backyards when the algae washes into shore and rots in the summertime, and lost beneficial uses of your lake and the beautiful shoreline that you've worked so hard to protect. Jogging trails, the ability to swim, to let your kids play in that water. These are all things that we call adverse effects under our provincial statutes. Dr. Auer has told you about the very sensitive nearshore habitat, which is the dark green nearshore area where there's enough light to grow algae and the right bottom surface for the algae to attach to. In that very sensitive zone, any unit of phosphorus that we add phosphorus 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, all year long. And in 2012, that phosphorus load was approximately 16 tons. While we've been having this discussion about what should happen in the Ajax nearshore, by 2016 it had increased to 23 tons in just those 4 years. So how did we get here? Why do we have a problem in the nearshore specifically? Well, our interim standard for total phosphorus dates back to 1979, and it relies on science from the 1975 time period. A lot has happened since 1975 in terms of our understanding of phosphorus, how it makes algae grow, and how we need to regulate to manage it. And I'm going to talk to you about the current regulatory understanding, but that is our standard for total phosphorus today. It dates back to 1975. That's just about as old as I am, and I have twins that are 12 years old now. The next thing to point out is that the standard from the 70s is 10 micrograms per liter of total phosphorus. And I'm going to talk to you about the standard we need to be using today. Finally, though, the other thing to note from the 1970s context is even then, the ministry's guidance was that this was a general guideline and it was to be supplemented by site-specific studies when coming up with a level for an effluent discharge like one from a sewage treatment plant. That has not been done in relation to this sewage treatment plant in relation to phosphorus discharges. So we've come from the 1970s to an understanding today, which is reflected in the current Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement, which was amended in 2012, that tells us we need to focus not on total phosphorus, but on soluble reactive phosphorus or bioavailable phosphorus. We've also come to understand that we're in the wrong order of magnitude. We can't be talking about 10 micrograms per liter. We need to be talking about 1. We need to get down to the area of 1 microgram per liter of SRP for the near shore to be protected. We've also been focusing on the wrong area in terms of management. We did a good job with the 1970s regulatory response in cleaning up the open waters of the lake. As you'll see, the graph shows that line falling to where it's under 10 micrograms per liter. When we took phosphates out of detergent and had that initial regulatory response, we did well for the open water of the lake, but we didn't protect the near shore. We failed to protect the near shore. And now we understand that we need to regulate differently in order to protect the near shore. And so fast forward to 2012, when we amended the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement, and we now have Annex 4, which speaks specifically to nutrients. And in that updated Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement, Canada and the US agreed that we needed to adopt an ecosystem objective for algae to keep algae below levels that cause a nuisance. So levels like that photo that we opened the presentation with. In order to do that, Canada and the US agreed that it was essential that we set phosphorus concentrations and loads specifically for the near shore. So not for the entire lake, as Dr. Auer showed you in that slide at the beginning of his presentation. That's not protective of the near shore. We need to set those targets for the near shore specifically. In addition, we need to prioritize load reductions in terms of phosphorus for those areas where there is a significant local impact, just like Ajax. And while all that work is going on, while that international work is going on, we've asked water treatment plants, sewage treatment plants like the Duffin Creek sewage treatment plant, to use an interim target that is half of the 1970s target. We've gone from 10 to 5. That's not the ultimate target, that's just while we get this work done. So that's the current regulatory understanding reflected in the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement. And that's because adverse effects that we see in the photographs on your screen today exist at current levels of discharge and current phosphorus loads. In order to make those problems get better, in order to see mitigation, we have to shrink the existing phosphorus footprint of the plant. So you've probably heard people say the regions are complying with the criteria in their permit. They are meeting their phosphorus levels. That is absolutely true. But I'm here to tell you that is not the whole story. It is not enough to meet the numerical criteria. Charge a material into water if it may impair water quality. Those prohibitions exist even if you have a permit in your hand and you're complying with that permit. You still may not cause an adverse effect. An adverse effect includes impairment of the natural environment, like the destruction of fish habitat we talked about a minute ago. It also includes material discomfort to people, the fact you can't open your window or enjoy your backyard, or enjoy your property in the way that you used to. These are all adverse effects that are prohibited by our existing legislation. There is also in our provincial water quality objectives one not related to phosphorus. This is right at the beginning of the entire provincial water quality objectives. All water shall be free from contaminating levels of substances and materials attributable to human activities that cause objectionable odor, taste, and turbidity, or that enhance the production of undesirable aquatic life or result in the dominance of nuisance species. Well, what Dr. Auer has taken you through today very much to me looks like the discharge of a material caused by a human activity that is resulting in the dominance of a nuisance species. So we have the regulatory authority to control this problem today. The ministry also has water quality management policies that tell us where we're not meeting our provincial water quality objectives, like the one I just showed you, we shall not degrade the water quality any further. On the contrary, we shall do the utmost to upgrade the water quality, and the ministry can require water pollution control measures to be implemented so that happens. As well, as the total phosphorus provincial water quality objective tells us, when we're looking at an effluent discharge to the near shore, there should be a site-specific receiving water assessment done to determine how much that water can take. How much phosphorus can we put in that water? And from there, we determine what level should go in the permit. That has not been done in relation to the plant and how much phosphorus it can discharge. So again, there's lots of regulatory authority to control this problem, and meeting the provincial water quality objectives is the floor, it's not the ceiling. Where we have water quality and environmental impacts that require more stringent numbers, the ministry can impose more stringent numbers. Finally, the ministry itself has something called a Statement of Environmental Values. Under the Environmental Bill of Rights, that Statement of Environmental Values must guide decision-making in relation to environmental matters. That Statement of Environmental Values talks about using a precautionary and science-based approach to decision-making, prioritizing pollution prevention, and working to ensure that significant environmental harm is rehabilitated. Now, in 2013, I stood in front of you to talk about the region's environmental study report, and I said, that slide on the screen right now shows us that the trend was that phosphorus was decreasing, and that if the plants were allowed to increase their flow to 630 MLD without changing anything, we were going to reverse the trend. We were going to be going in the wrong direction, and phosphorus was going to triple. In response to that concern, the town of Ajax and approximately 90 residents and NGOs filed bump-up requests, or requests to the minister to require something be done in relation to phosphorus. In response to that request for help, the minister issued an order in 2016, and the very first thing in the order was that the regions were required to retain a wastewater expert to determine how phosphorus concentrations and loads in the effluent from the plant can be reduced to the lowest achievable level prior to entering the outfall for both current operating conditions and future operating conditions. I'm going to ask you to keep two things in mind as we go forward. The first is lowest achievable level, and the second is both current and future operating conditions. So the minister asked the regions to think not only about how to do better in 2041, how to make sure we don't make things a lot worse in 2041, but also how do we do better in relation to the current discharge from the plant. The order reflects the modern regulatory context that is in the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement. It talks about things like bioavailable phosphorus and reducing the load from the plant in the near shore. So it reflects the change that we've seen from the 70s forward to 2012. And that is what the PRAP report is responding to. Few things. First, it has to report on the plant's discharges historically, so from 2011 or 2012 forward. And it has to tell us about how the plant operates to remove phosphorus. A few things are important to mention there before we look at optimization and tertiary treatment. The first is that the PRAP study makes clear that as flows increase, the plant's ability to remove phosphorus decreases, just as a function of flow. We don't remove the phosphorus as well as more flow is going through the plant. If nothing were done, if we were operating using current practices, things would be worse than I thought when I stood in front of you in 2013. I said they would triple. The data shows they would actually have quadrupled if nothing was done. So that is using the region's own data. And as I've said, in the 4 years or so, we've been having this debate between 2012 and 2016. The total phosphorus load has increased by 1.8 times, and the SRP load has increased by 2.6 times. Now, the PRAP looked at two primary responses. What do we do in relation to phosphorus? It looked at optimizing the existing plant, so sticking with primary and secondary levels of treatment, but tweaking the process to do as well as it possibly could. And then it looked at tertiary treatment, which is a new and higher level of treatment to remove phosphorus. So just focusing for a moment on optimization. The PRAP makes very clear that optimization, although it is the region's preferred alternative, does very little for us in terms of offering relief. As you'll see in the boxes on the slide, optimization in 2041 would see the total phosphorus load go from 122 kilograms per day to 284 kilograms per day. So the phosphorus reduction action plan that the regions are putting forward would actually see phosphorus increase between now and 2041, quite significantly. The PRAP has also made clear that secondary treatment, which is what optimization is, has a fundamental limitation in relation to phosphorus. And that is, because of the biological processes that happen at the secondary level, you can't take away too much phosphorus or you create problems with the bugs. Okay? They need a certain amount of phosphorus to live and have the right kind of process in place. We don't have that problem with tertiary treatment. Once the effluent has gone through primary and secondary treatment, the bugs are happy and well fed, and we can take away all the phosphorus we want without causing any difficulty. So there's a fundamental limitation with secondary that doesn't exist with tertiary. And that's part of the reason they can't actually decrease the phosphorus very much without moving to tertiary treatment. So in my respectful submission, a plan that proposes to increase phosphorus is not a phosphorus reduction action plan. It also, in my view, fails to comply with the minister's order. And here's some examples in terms of the numbers. Your average phosphorus load in 2012, 97 kilograms per day. It would go up to 284 kilograms per day. If we use the town's preferred approach, which is tertiary treatment using active flow, we would see that load fall both from current loads and from future loads in 2041 to 33 kilograms a day. That takes us to tertiary treatment. So what new method could be used at the plant to remove the phosphorus in response to the minister's order? The region studied 4 approaches. Their experts determined that all 4 were viable. They were reliable, constructible, they could be operated, and they were future-proof, which means they can be expanded to respond to capacity increases required at the plant. So all 4 would work. But the minister also asked us to think about how well do they remove phosphorus, and then how much do they cost? And in response to both of those questions, the clear preferred technology is something called active flow. That's a trade name for a technique termed ballasted flocculation. I'm going to call it active flow, it's easier to remember. It's the first column you'll see on the slide in front of you. And it is the one that the top part of the slide shows you phosphorus removal ability. And you'll see that very clearly ballasted flocculation or active flow does the best. It gets us down to 7 to 8 kilograms a day of SRP. And that is the kind of phosphorus that makes algae grow. That's the kind we need to control. The bottom part of the slide shows you some costing. These are the region's numbers. The difference is decentralized or centralized construction. We're in favor of centralized construction, which is more cost effective. And the cost there is $206 million in net present costs for both capital and operation. That's the most cost effective of all 4 methods studied. We do believe it's likely overestimated for a few reasons I'll try and touch on very briefly. Perhaps the most important is that it's been sized, or the cost estimates have been developed for a plant much bigger than the plant we're talking about. The plant we're talking about is 630 MLD. They did the cost calculations for 1,070 MLD. They gave us some reasons for doing that, but when you look back at the ESR, when the regions were doing the cost estimates, they used 630, not 1070. So in my view, there may be some overestimation, over-conservatism in the cost estimates. Secondly, they have estimated the costs for a flow of 1070 with part of the treatment plant shut down. So they've built in redundant treatment trains for a plant much larger than it needs to be. They have estimated decentralized construction, so a active flow treatment system after every treatment train. And they would need 13 treatment trains with that approach, whereas we think they could do it with 7. And finally, they've proposed phasing the construction costs. So those are the costs, but what you need to remember is really that ActiFlow does the best at removing phosphorus, and it's also the most cost-effective of all 4 methods that they looked at. So ActiFlow reduces loads both at the current flow and future flow. It offers load reduction, which provides us with a chance to have nearshore recovery. And in my submission is the only approach, a tertiary treatment is the only approach that allows us to comply with the minister's order, which, if you recall, said, tell me what gets you to the lowest achievable level. That is ActiFlow. And I'll finish with 2 graphs that really sum this up very simply. And on the left side of the graph, and this is from Al Saikinen, our wastewater expert, from his report. In the black line, you will see actual historical data. This is the load for total phosphorus over the years 2011 to 2017. Okay, that's the black line. The orange line is what the regions are proposing. You'll see that is not a reducing line. That line is an increasing phosphorus load from today all the way out to 2041. In blue, you'll see what would happen if we had tertiary treatment. Okay, so tertiary treatment takes us down below the black, which is current, and below the projected future limits. The same is true if we look at SRP, which is what we really care about, bioavailable phosphorus. Okay, tertiary treatment takes us down below future and below current to offer nearshore recovery. So in view of all of that, our request is to the minister that seasonal tertiary treatment be required. We only need to treat and remove phosphorus during the period where algae grows. That is approximately May 1st to the end of August, plus a 2-week clearing time to clear out the effluent before the season starts. We are asking that the best available technology be required at the plant, and that is ActiFlow levels of phosphorus removal. Mr. Saikinen advises that that should be able to be designed, procured, and constructed within 5 years, so we could flip the switch and see that working within 5 years. And so we would ask for Council's direction to file submissions with the Ministry, responding to the PRAP report, supported by the expert reports of Dr. Auer and Mr. Saikinen. And the proposed resolution on the screen is that Ajax Council directs Gowling to submit comments to the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change on behalf of the town of Ajax in response to the Phosphorus Reduction Action Plan study. And following my comment, I believe Rachel Wraith would like to address communications. Thank you.
Ms. Wraith?
Thank you. I just wanted to come before Council just to update you on our communication strategy following tonight's meeting. So following tonight's meeting, the town will be implementing a 10-day communications blitz. The goal of the blitz is to mobilize the community to call on the Minister of the Environment and Climate Change to implement tertiary treatment at the water pollution control plant before the February 23rd deadline. From February 13th to the 23rd, the town will host 8 pop-up events at town facilities and the upcoming Winterfest event on Family Day. Here, residents will be able to send an urgent message to the minister via postcard, email, and social media. Our goal is to have 1,000 messages sent by the deadline. We have once again partnered with Concerned Citizens Group, Pickering Ajax Citizens Together to protect our water. And they will be hosting a special information night on February 15th from 7 to 9 p.m. at the Ajax Community Center. In addition, we have implemented a stakeholder engagement plan that includes briefings to key political leaders, environmental NGOs, and PACT POW. Our NGO partners will be developing separate water quality submissions to the minister. It's imperative that residents get involved and voice their concerns to the minister. This is our last opportunity to influence the minister's decision and to solve the Ajax waterfront algae issue. For more information on how residents can take action and get involved, you can visit saveourwaterfrontnow.com.
Thank you, Ms. Wraith. That concludes the delegation's questions. Councillor Ashby?
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you for your presentation. It's pretty clear to me, based on the information that's provided to council here, that the tertiary option seems to be the preferred option. So my questions are pretty specific. The cost, just a clarification on the cost. Those numbers, is that a one-time cost, or is that a cost per year, or what's happening with that cost?
Ms. Danahy?
Yes, through the chair, the costs that were shown on the screen were net present costs with everything in. So that's capital and operations and maintenance over the lifetime of the plant for the period that they've looked at.
Okay. You spoke about the impacts in terms of what this option would have. What are the long-term negative? There must be long-term negative impacts.
Of
It can't be
tertiary
zero.
treatment?
With the tertiary option, you spoke about the benefits,
Yes.
right, of employing this technology. What are the long-term negative impacts? There has to be some.
In my respectful submission, the long-term effect is that if this is done at Ajax and your near shore is cleaned up, then other plants will have to follow suit around the lake.
No, maybe I didn't ask my question properly. There's a benefit, which you've clearly laid out in terms of us using our waterfront, lost revenue in our waterfront. But what are the negative impacts? Like for everything you do that's positive, there has to be a negative impact. So in addition to the cost, what are the negative impacts of employing this type of technology?
I'm not aware of other negative impacts of tertiary technology. You're preventing a contaminant from being released.
Okay. I'll ask it again another way, at another time. This cost, who pays for this?
If it is something that is mandated by the Ministry of the Environment, then the regions have an obligation to comply with it, and then they have the right to access development charge funding for it. There are funding options available as well. There's infrastructure funding that can be applied for through the federal government in conjunction with the province. That is a matter for the plant.
Okay, so then what is the issue here with getting this technology accepted?
The PRAP report, unlike the ESR said we don't think ActiFlow will work. We don't think it's viable. The PRAP very clearly says ActiFlow is absolutely viable, as are the other three options, but we won't implement it until all of the plants around Lake Ontario are similarly required to implement it.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor George?
Yes, thank you for the presentations. Gives us a lot of information, and but in a relatively understandable way, which I appreciate. Just on your last comment, isn't this one of the largest plants on Lake Ontario, if not the largest?
That's right.
Shouldn't it lead by example? You don't have to answer that, but I would think most people would believe that it should.
I would agree.
Also, I wanted to ask just a couple of questions, and it may require Dr. Auer. I know Dr. Auer mentioned 40 years of experience studying the issue of algae.
That's true. Sorry, we haven't gotten more done in 40 years.
I don't think she's asked the question yet, Dr. Auer.
No, I just want to say this is your expertise.
It's true.
And my understanding is that PRAP study didn't look, nor was it directed to look at the actual conditions in the lake and the algae.
That's correct.
They just looked at the way you can reduce the.
I'm sorry, please.
Okay,
finish.
go ahead.
The PRAP order from the ministry is very clear in what questions and responsibilities it lays out. And there was a mutual agreement between the town representatives and the region representatives that we would live the letter of the law with respect to addressing the PRAP and not extend it in various directions. And so we did that.
Yes.
But it was incumbent upon us, once we had preferred options identified outside of the PRAP, then to respond by examining what their impact might be.
Yes, and I think that's hard for people to comprehend. that
Questions,
the-
Councillor
The
Jordan?
yes, and I want, that then leads to the next one. You actually studied the algae and the water conditions and the plume, et cetera. I wanted to ask you, you had a slide that said 98% of the phosphorus between May and August came from the sewage
That's correct.
plant.
Yes.
How did you determine that?
There is available on the web flow data for the Rouge River and for Duffins Creek. We obtained the Carruthers Creek flow by watershed proportion to Duffins Creek. There is from the operating report of the plant, their flows. TRCA provides phosphorus concentrations for the Rouge River, for Duffins Creek and Carruthers Creek, and the operating report for the treatment plant provides their phosphorus concentrations. The product of each individual source's flow and concentration is the load. I summed those to get the total load, and then divided the Duffins Creek load by the total load to get 98%.
Okay, because I think that's been the argument all along from the regions that,
Questions, Councillor Jordan?
I'm getting to it,
Get to it.
that it's the creeks and so on causing this problem. However, you have determined, no, it is not, it's the sewage treatment plant.
That's correct.
Yeah, and I know at one time also you studied the actual algae tissue. I wonder
Right.
if you could comment on that, because you didn't mention it.
The figure that I presented with the colored dots along the shoreline represents the results of the measurements of the algae tissue and how much phosphorus it contained. And where we found orange and red dots, that was where the tissue content was enriched in P beyond its neighbors to the side. And those were all associated with wastewater treatment regions in the near shore.
So your conclusion is unequivocally that the sewage treatment plant is contributing to our algae growth. And if it was reduced to below a certain number, I think it's 1.5, we wouldn't have the algae problem.
Well, we would know for certain that the treatment plant was making no contribution to any problem that exists. It eliminates them as a source.
Yeah, and I know you've done a lot of work on this issue. Have other scientists looked at your work as well?
Right. Our work has been widely published in the peer-reviewed primary literature, but also my report engages the work that was done by Environment Canada, by Fisheries and Oceans Canada, by MOECC, by the University of Waterloo, and we have taken all of that information into consideration in building our understanding of the material that I presented tonight.
Well, thank you, and I do hope that the province listens, because it's very, very convincing, and you certainly have done some leading edge work to contribute to the knowledge around this, so we should be using it to make decisions. And if nothing is done
Comments
on
are later,
this,
Councillor
then
Jordan.
Whitby, no, I'm still a question.
Get to it.
Whitby and Oshawa should be as concerned as we are, because they'll be facing the same issue if this isn't dealt with.
Yes.
Yes. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Councillor Collier?
Thank you, Your Worship. Some of my questions have been asked. Dr. Auer, you're the expert that we hired from the town. Were you given any direction other than to just figure out what the problem was? Like, we didn't say the problem is the sewage treatment plant, prove it. We just said go and find out what the problem is. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And your professional opinion is it's undeniably, it's absolutely the sewage treatment plant. That's your findings?
The sewage treatment plant is by far the largest contributor of phosphorus that generates nuisance algal growth.
Okay.
No question.
The region also would have hired their own experts, I believe. Is that correct?
That's a hard question for me to answer. They don't tell me whether they're working with, they haven't told me that they're working with experts, so I really don't know. They brought in some top-level people to do the prep. These were wastewater treatment professionals, not water quality professionals. So proceeding past the ESR, I am not aware that the regions have brought in any professionals to look at the water quality problem.
I'm not either. That's why I asked the question. The region's opinion is that it's not the sewage treatment plant, and they base that, and I do have a question, they base that because they say, well, in Oshawa and Cobourg, there isn't a sewage treatment plant, and they have chloroffer issues also. What can you say to that? Because that's their whole case.
Not to be entirely flippant, but where do the people in Oshawa and Cobourg go to the bathroom?
I'm just saying, that's their case. That's their objection.
There is a major treatment plant, at least one, in Oshawa that discharges to Lake Ontario.
Okay.
And there are two in Cobourg.
Okay. Well, I didn't buy that explanation either. I think the maximum is, and I'm going from memory, is 311 kilograms per day, the maximum the plant can put out. And I guess this might be to Ms. Danahy, as far as you spoke about the adverse effect. And you said we can quite clearly show that we have adverse effect. I don't understand why the minister wouldn't just implement this right away rather than, say, do a phosphorus reduction action plan. Can you speak to that? I mean, if we can prove there is an adverse effect, why are we even going through this process?
So the minister's order comes out of an environmental assessment process. You might remember that the plant had an outfall EA that was a response to an earlier minister's order. And that outfall EA looked at solutions for dilution of the effluent, but it didn't talk about phosphorus. It didn't talk about the effect of the current phosphorus or the impact of the preferred solution or other options like tertiary treatment on the nuisance algae problem. And so Ajax and the residents and the NGOs that put in requests to the minister said, this hasn't been studied. And a bump up or Part 2 order request is something that would elevate a class EA to an individual EA. And we've said to the ministry, it's not the process that we care about, it's the outcome. So we just want to see the phosphorus appropriately managed. The minister listened to Ajax's concerns and the concerns of residents and the NGOs, and instead of sending the process into an individual EA study then, which could have been the outcome, issued a very targeted order that said, go fill in the gaps that weren't studied in the EA and tell us what technology would solve the problem. So that was what the order was intended to do. Now that it's the PRAP report is to be submitted to the ministry, as is our response and the response of residents, the ministry has at its disposal first of all, the answers about what the solution would look like and the ability to implement that solution. So I am confident that they will do the right thing.
Okay. And just to Dr. Auer, your map on the Corbett Creek water pollution control plant showing the 12 square kilometer mixing, I don't remember the term used. We didn't see as heavy concentration much further east, but they do have sewage treatment plants. Can you speak to that?
That's right. And, you know, think of this as an area of influence that grows and shrinks with the magnitude of the discharger. That in order to have observed something up at Corbett Creek, we would have had to have been operating much more closely to their discharge than in the vicinity of the Duffins plant.
Okay.
And that carries on up into Cobourg. Their plants are very small, and you have to get fairly close to where they discharge before you can detect an effect.
Okay, so it's the volume.
Yeah.
And again, I think the PRAP report was good in that it got the region to admit that tertiary treatment does work and is a viable option. However, I think it fell short by not having the word implement in it. It said find out, create the plan, but it didn't have implement. Just to the funding, and I'll try and word this as a yes-no answer. Like I know, this is an 80-20 split between York and Durham. And I happen to know for a fact that the both the region of York and the region of Durham already have the funding for this in their long-range capital forecasts. Are you aware of that?
I believe that's correct, yes.
Right, thank you. Just to the 4 times, Ms. Danahy, just your last question, the phosphorus load, you said through the modeling is now going to be not 3 times like you originally thought, but 4 times. It's getting very close to that 311 kilograms per day.
That's actually, the 4 times is if they kept their current operating procedures at the maximum flow, so that would actually be above 311 kilograms per day. So
Okay.
they would be offside the permit, and without the PRAP, they would have to do something. So that's before changes either to optimize or to implement tertiary treatment.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. Thank you, Your Worship.
Councillor Dice?
Thank you. Most of my questions have been asked. Just going with their short-term, medium, and long-term strategy. So in order to meet the dilution rates, they need to bring in the tertiary treatment at some point. So really, the optimization is a short-term gap.
I think we're talking about 2 different things. So the outfall EA was required because they weren't meeting dilution ratios of 20:1 with the
Right.
existing outfall. So the original preferred alternative of the duck-billed valve was to
Right.
increase dilution.
So in the PRAP, though, it speaks to how they might not meet that rate regulation for operation at a certain point unless they bring in the tertiary treatment.
Councillor, I believe that the word that sticks me a bit here in that is solution, that it would be a short-term solution. It is no solution whatsoever. There is no prospect that optimization will reduce the beach fouling at Ajax. So it may be a short-term choice, but to call it a solution isn't correct.
Thank you. And I appreciate that. And I used the wrong word, I'm sorry. And that's what I'm getting at, is we have this optimization plan in place.
Questions, Councillor Dice?
So at what point would they have to bring in the tertiary treatment?
Again, I think we might be confusing 2 things. Dilution really isn't affected. I'll ask Al Sykin, and you jump in, Al, if I don't explain this properly. But the valve was to change the dilution. The PRAP doesn't really deal with dilution at all. The PRAP was really specifically focused on phosphorus reduction.
Okay.
And to come back to your, I think you might be talking about the minister referred to a level of 0.35 in the order. Can they hit 0.35 milligrams per liter? They can't do that without tertiary from the get-go. Optimization will not allow them to hit 0.35, which was an interim target voted
Yes.
by the minister. They can only hit a range of 0.35 to 0.45. So even if they implemented it right away, they wouldn't be able to hit 0.35.
So what I'm getting at is, it did mention also in the report, if I'm not mistaken, that they're going to go ahead with the pipe and the diffusers at some point.
The diffuser heads, the duck-billed?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, that's part of their preferred alternative, is to optimize secondary and to put the diffusers in place. The problem with that is those diffusers are dealing with an area that's meters squared in diameter, and the problem that's out there is kilometers squared. It's a technology that addresses a problem that shouldn't even be considered. The area that the diffusers impact is the size of this room.
So it wouldn't really be necessary if they were using the active flow. Thank you.
Further questions? Being none, thank you very much to all the presenters. Thank you. Members of Council, I have a motion moved by Councillor Brown, seconded by Councillor Dies, that Ajax Council directs Gowlings WLG to submit comments to the Ministry of the Environment and Climate Change on behalf of the town of Ajax in response to the results of the Phosphorus Reduction Action Plan study. Comments, Councillor Jordan?
Thank you. This expansion is to serve York Region, basically, 80% or more. It's to serve growth in York Region. And yet here we are downstream and we're getting the effects of it, and we'll continue to get the effects for many years to come. I think the example used was out to 2041, and how the effluent and the SRP will just increase and increase significantly, I think quadruple, which will only make the impacts worse and also far spreading. And it will be Whitby that will start to raise the alarms, and Oshawa, if we don't do anything about it. We know very well here in Ajax what it's like to live with an abundance of phosphorus on our waterfront. That picture, I remember that very well. I stood in it. It was like standing in quicksand. It was sickening. And I think that the effects, the smell, well, that year, there was a year when it was very hot. Luckily last year it wasn't so bad, but when it was very hot, the smell of the rotting algae smelled like rotting sewage. It was sickening. I know that people down along where I live near the waterfront couldn't use their backyards without smelling it, wouldn't want to walk down there at certain locations where there were large amounts because it would make them nauseated and sick. And other people told me that were in closer vicinity, their homes, they had to keep their windows closed all the time because the smell just infiltrated into their homes. And this is the public waterfront that all our taxpayers have paid so much for to keep it in public ownership so that people can enjoy the trails, the water, and it was always our pride and joy and should continue to be, and to attract people to it. But with this algae growing on our waterfront, that's virtually impossible, and unless something's going to be done, it will be for a long time and only get worse and more widespread. As far as the PRAP study at the region, it's very important that people know that that study was, and they're mandated by the province, that they look at reducing the phosphorus and how that could be done and to the lowest level. And we heard that it was agreed upon that tertiary treatment did get it to the lowest level. However, I don't know that anybody else at the region or anyone else has had any expert on algae looking at their waterfront to determine the impact of the effluent from a sewage plant on the growth of algae. We did that. We hired the expert, and as you heard, Dr. Auer's worked 40 years in this field and had many papers published which have been peer-reviewed, and he has determined that the sewage treatment plant is the large factor in growing algae on our waterfront. I know at one time he described it as we fertilize our garden or whatever, that on the growing season. I don't go out, nor should we be putting phosphorus anyway on our garden, and I don't anymore, but lots of people do. You're not going out this time of year to do it. It's in the summer in the growing season, and that's why it was looked at to do the active flow treatment just during the growing season. I certainly feel very strongly that the province should listen to this and enforce the owners of the sewage treatment plant, and specifically it would be York that should be paying the lion's share because the expansion is due to their need for treatment of their sewage from York region, and that our waterfront and Lake Ontario shouldn't be impacted. And I'll tell you that if something hasn't been done, Whitby and Oshawa and all along who will have the same results as we're experiencing now will be yelling just as loud as we are. And why would we wait for that? We can do something now. Don't make the mistakes of the past. We heard the regulations are from the 1970s. Holy cow, if I went to a doctor or anybody and they were basing their treatment on information from science in the 1970s, I'd exit so quickly they wouldn't see me. So why are we relying on science when we have up-to-date research now? So I do thank Dr. Auer for all his work, and Ms. Danahy for all her work on this issue. It's very important to Ajax, and certainly I hope the province should be compelled to listen to this research and do the right thing. And lead by example. Don't wait until everybody else has done it. That's the lamest excuse I've ever heard. You wouldn't say that to a child. Oh, I'm not going to make you do it until everybody else has. We all know that if we're a parent.
Councilor Collier.
Thank you, Worship. And I'll try not to repeat the comments. I've lived down by the lake since 1969. No need to do the math. It's a while, and I've seen this get worse and worse and worse over time. And now it's to a point where there's weeks in the summer where people just can't go down to the waterfront, which is one of our biggest assets here in the town. We've committed a lot of taxpayer money to make this 7 kilometers of public space, and we're not able to enjoy it. Councillor Jordan is absolutely right, and I'd said about the funding, this is an 80% York issue. York is sitting up there, and they're going to build 125,000 new homes in the next 20 years, and this basically equals $500 per home in development charge, but it means nothing for us here in Durham. This is not a problem for us. This is a York finance issue, but we are the ones stuck with the flow coming out on our waterfront and our beaches. So we've expensed about a little over $2 million of town money to hire the proper experts and prove our case and push this through. Had we not, the region would have gone ahead with these duck-billed diffusers, and it wouldn't have done anything, and nothing would happen. The only reason we've got the minister's attention on this is because we invested that money and got the research and proved our case. The region admits it grudgingly, but until they're forced to do it, they're not going to do it. Plain and simple. That's where we are. So, I mean, we need to, again, like our first item we talked about with the slots, we need to make this very public again. We made this very public during the last election, provincially. We had all the candidates, they all signed the pledge, and we're going to have to do that again. The minister will have this prop report. Our comments are going to go as of today. I'm pretty sure you are going to unanimously support those comments. And we need to make this as public as possible so it can't be ignored. And again, we talk about transparency. We need to make everybody involved and make this the decision that can't be hidden because it is so public. And we've done a good job so far. I know we have a marketing plan coming, and I think we've done the right thing all the way through. I know Ajax is often seen as the squeaky wheel, but you know what? 9 times out of 10 we're right. And I think this is one of those times. So thank you again for all your hard work.
Councillor Dias?
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to thank Jennifer Danahy and Dr. Auer, Al Sacnon, and for helping us understand this issue. We've come a long way in the past few years, and it's much appreciated. And also to the citizens group PAC-POW, who has helped educate the public on this, which was so important. So the bottom line for me, in reading this report and looking at all this data, is it's not going to help us moving forward at all. We have a problem now that needs addressing. So it's really up to the minister. He has the power to make change. And I think he must understand that it's very important to protect our quality of water for the future of our generations. And it's also very important to protect the environment around our Great Lakes and the aquatic life in the water as well. So it's up to him, and I encourage people to attend the bump outs that communications staff have put forward for you to attend to get more information and to write to the minister. I think that's the only way we're going to get some action. Thank you.
Further? I'd just like to, without repeating what's been said, I can't say how disappointed I was in the submission submitted by the regions of Durham and York, and especially disappointed that it seems to be that whatever the region of York wants, Durham goes along with, irrespective of the terrible impact this is having on not just Ajax's waterfront, but as this plant expands, it's going to be a large part of Durham's Lake Ontario waterfront. And, it's perhaps not surprising, but I was very disappointed that there wasn't a proactive attitude to this. There wasn't even talk about putting in the works plans for tertiary treatment at some point in the future. There wasn't talk about so-called optimization being what they're going to do now, but they would start a process whereby the tertiary treatment would happen at some defined point in the future. It was just optimization, which is, they should all go into PR work, because to call this optimization is like, I don't know, it's like calling a Studebaker a Cadillac, or anyways, it's just spin. And so it's clear, I think, that tertiary treatment has to be done. It's clear now that it's viable. It's clear now that it's the most cost-effective of various ways to do the tertiary treatment. It's clear that it has dramatic impacts that will take the phosphorus load in the near shore down to a level where we can see real impacts and reduction of the nuisance cladifera. The minister simply must act. Like any government who pretends to be a champion of Great Lakes water quality, which surely includes the near shore, where everybody lives, can't ignore the facts here. They need to order the regions of York and Durham to get this work done. And they have the funds to do this. It's their responsibility to collect the funds and have the funds to do it. And it's about time that the minister and the government order them to do what is right for the lake, for the citizens who live by the lake, and for all of us who depend so much on the quality and integrity of Lake Ontario and indeed all the Great Lakes. So I'm pleased that this is going forward. I'm pleased that we have a strong response to the submissions made by York and Durham, and I can only hope that it's seriously considered and action is taken by the government, which is where the buck stops. So I don't think a recorded vote has been asked for.
Recorded vote, please, Chair.
Apparently it has. Madam Clerk?
Just wait for you to finish.
I'm just going to consider Regional Councillor Jordan the requester on that one. So on the motion, in favor or opposed, Regional Councillor Jordan?
In favor.
Councillor Ashby?
In favor.
Councillor Brown?
In favor.
Regional Councillor Collier?
In favor.
Councillor Crawford?
In favor.
Councillor Dyes?
In favor?
Mayor Parrish?
In favor. That's carried unanimously. Thank you. And before I leave this subject, I just want to not only thank Dr. Auer and Ms. Danahy for all their work. I want to thank all of the NGOs that have assisted us in this matter. I want to thank all the citizens involved in PAC-POW who have worked so hard on this matter. And I want to encourage all, it's been said earlier, but I want to encourage all citizens who are concerned with this issue. You have the opportunity, just like the town does, to put your oar in the water and make your submission as well. That's why we got to the point where the minister took our bump up request seriously. That's why the minister gave his order directing that this PRAP study be done. And it's important that the government knows that this is not just a resolution as a submission by council, but this reflects the broad public support of the people who live there and care about this water quality issue. So I encourage each and every one of you to get involved in this with letter writing and in any other way that you can to let the minister know exactly how strongly you feel about this issue. I have a motion moved by Councillor Collier and second by Councillor Brown that bylaw number 7, 2018, to confirm the proceedings of council at the special meeting of February 12th be read a first, second, and third time and passed. In favor? Opposed? That's carried. And I have a motion moved by Councillor Collier, second by Councillor Crawford, that this meeting be adjourned. In favor? Opposed? That's carried. Members of council, we're going to start the budget meeting at 7:45 in 4 minutes, chaired by Councillor Ashby. So we'll resume at 7:45.